I think it's so valuable. That line from St. Peter, I don't remember the document, but he goes, what is it? Always have an answer for, or what is it?
The
Have a
hope that is
reason,
in you. Be prepared to give an answer for the hope that is
the
in you.
hope that is
Yeah.
in you. There you go. The thing that strikes me about that is everyone goes, yes, okay, let's everybody get into apologetics. And I'm like, yes, but hold on a second. If nobody can see that there is a hope in you, the reasons aren't really going to matter too much. If having a conversation is going to make you an enemy, maybe that needs to happen. But I really love the line, the advice from, I think it was C.S. Lewis, who said, after having an argument with an atheist, can we still go out for coffee or beer afterwards?
Right.
I want to be that kind of person where we can profoundly disagree on whatever, but we're still going to be good friends because I genuinely want what's best for them. And I'm not going to force anything until they ask. And that's why they say, have good reasons for the hope that is in you. That implies that it's up to them to elicit,
Right. Be
questions.
prepared to give an answer means someone's asking a question.
There you go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Making Every Class Catholic podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Dominic de Souza. If you have followed my work at all online, you know something of Dominic because he is the webmaster who has designed the Making Every Class Catholic website. So if you're looking for someone who can make you a beautiful website, check out makingeveryclasscatholic.com to see just one example of Dominic's work. But in addition to being a webmaster, Dominic is doing incredible work with writers, fantasy, sci-fi, in work that he calls, I love this phrase, and we'll talk about it later on, healing the culture. And so, Dominic, welcome to the Making Every Class Catholic podcast.
Thank you, Brett. It's good to be with you.
And let me say, I'm just getting used to practicing saying this so I forget. But if you want to support the podcast, the best way to do it is to sign up for a paid membership on Substack. So we have free newsletter and podcast on Substack, but there's lots of goodies like lesson plans. I'm serializing the sequel to Making Every Class Catholic, Educating for Eternity, behind the paywall there. And so if you want to support the podcast, obviously like it, share it. But if you really want to back us up, you can sign up over at Substack. So with that out of the way, Dominic, can you introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners?
Thank you. It's very kind. So, goodness, I am a consummate dork who loves design and branding. I'm very fortunate to be a cradle Catholic. I was born in New Zealand, and then I went to school in Fiji, and then again in France, and then I now live in the United States and lived most of my life in Australia. So there's a lot of different cultural influences there. And then from the Catholic standpoint, had a lot of exposure to a bunch of different Christian rites: Byzantine, Ruthenian, Ukrainian, the Latin, the ordinary form. So there's a lot of different influences going on. And then but that's not to say that I was a very good Sunday school kid. In fact, I usually hated it because it was boring and I wanted to read novels and stories, and I wanted to write my own and draw superheroes and do all of that so much. My dad had to forbid it at one point because we were obsessed about superheroes and creating our own and drawing them all the time. Gosh, lost my train of thought there. Well, becoming Catholic, or not being Catholic, is something that is deeply, deeply meaningful to me, which is why when you reached out at one point, like a year and a half ago, going, hey, we need a website for this fantastic book project that you've been working on, and you wanted to create a community and a course and all of this, I was delighted to be able to partner with you and to support you and help you to get that up and into the online. Again, going back to just being that nerd, I have a fiction writing community because I love to write novels. And especially during the pandemic, and a lot of us were isolated, and I realized that I wanted to create a community that I wasn't finding online. Specifically, I wanted a community that understood why I loved fiction. And back then, it seemed enough to simply say, we need a Catholic fiction community. So we launched, and it was basically called that, Catholic Author. And then after about 4 years or so, we realized, okay, we actually need to define what we mean, because there's a lot of phenomenally good people out there who don't have the Catholic label and maybe don't follow the same tradition, but they believe in the same values. And then there's a lot of us inside the Catholic tradition who do have that label and do all the things, but don't share the same values. So, okay, we needed to clarify things a bit better. And so what we decided was to hunker down on four key ideas that we believe capture what it means to be a healthy minded fiction author. And the first one was meaning. And the four M words that I'm going to list, they're all deeply meaningful to me. They're how I try to orient my life. I think they create a healthy psyche, a healthy soul, a healthy spiritual life, healthy way to engage with everybody, that sort of thing. And all of that, of course, flows into the kind of stories that you want to tell. So meaning, we're in a meaning crisis right now. So stories that believe there should be meaning, or authors who believe that there should be meaning, that is a healing thing for a lot of people, especially young people. So there's meaning. Then there's myth making. And myth making means there are eternal truths that may be perceived dimly, but they're regularly re engaging with humanity. They want to be re understood, re engaged with. They're timeless. And these are not merely the myths of the ancient world, it's the things behind those myths that want to be understood and engaged with by the human story, the human journey, and they're continuing to re-engage with us. So there's meaning, there's myth making, and I've forgotten one of them because I'm a genius, and I put it on my own website so I wouldn't forget. The other one is one of them is magic, in the sense that we live in an enchanted universe. We have lost this sense, but the sense that it is alive and charged with the glory of God, that it is filled with angelic beings and activity. We have created a mindset or an idea that it is or at least we've been told, it's a dead cosmos and, you don't matter and life is really nothing. So when you return to the idea that it's enchanted, that it's beloved and it's good and it's maybe very good, your attitude towards how you live in this universe changes. Plus the fact that there's an argument to be made that magic can be very, very real in a very good way. Just think Aslan, Narnia, and all of that sort of thing. The final one is moral good, in the sense that uh, we need to take action in this universe, and therefore we need constraints on our activity, and we need guidelines and goals for how we choose to act that contribute towards human thriving. And so as I was thinking about those four things, meaning matters, moral good, mythic stories, and then a magical, universe, a magical creation, those really feel like the bedrock definition of what it means to live in a Catholic, a Christian, or a Christified cosmos. So if we can rally together authors who love those ideas and who believe in those ideas, I want to see what kind of stories those kind of authors create, because the culture is hungry for them. Even if they can't say that, they're hungry for these kinds of stories. And in my opinion, the stories that truly have endured, not just the classics, but over this past century, like you and I were talking about Lord of the Rings before we hit record. Lord of the Rings hits all the hallmarks that I'm talking about. Some modern stories that we might argue about also, I think, hit those too. You got to do a little bit of digging, but it's there, and there's a reason why the culture comes onto them and just doesn't know why they love them, but because we're intuiting these things are healing. They're healthy for us. It's just a matter of doing the adult thing, which is discerning out the dross from the gold.
Right. Well, I almost feel like we could just do the podcast now on, 15 minutes on each of the four things, which might not be a bad thing to do, although I did have other things I wanted to throw by you. Let me start with story. And let's tie that to your first one, right? Meaning. So we're meaning making and meaning needing creatures. In a Catholic worldview, we don't think that we can just make our own meaning ex nihilo.
Right.
It has to be in dialogue with reality that exists and has its own integrity. We don't sort of impose our meaning, but we discern in a certain sense. So if we create meaning, it's not, in a sort of self-deifying kind of way.
Right.
But it's interesting that when God becomes one of us, he becomes a storyteller, right? He doesn't become a scientist, right? There's lots, or an army general, or any number of other very impactful kinds of things that you might do. There's a deep message, I think, about the needs of the human person, that God comes to us as a storyteller.
Yeah.
That highlights something about this need for making sense of the world around us, and not just meeting. We have people today who have all their physical needs met,
Mhm.
who are at higher risk of taking their own lives than any humans in history.
Yeah. It's true.
And I think that goes to what you identify as this crisis of meaning and the stories that we need to make sense of who we are and our place in the world.
Yeah, yeah. There's one of my favorite movies is The Last Samurai. And on the eve of the final battle, darn, I forgot the name of the Japanese general, but he turns to Nathan Algren, played by Tom Cruise, and he says, "Do you believe in destiny?" I think he said. And Algren's response is, "I believe a man does what he can until his destiny is revealed to him." And I think that applies perfectly to like what you're saying about meaning. Meaning is like, I think the word is ontological, but that's very fancy. Ontological goalpost, an orientation for your life. It's the lighthouse at the end of the journey that orients you, gives you direction. Now, if your gaze is cloudy, you're not going to be able to see or discern things very well. God works with that. God works by 1%, 1 degree at a time. Rarely do we see titanic shifts, 180-degree turns or something in how somebody lives their life. That's usually quite a traumatic thing to do. There's more often an accompanying gradualism, I think, in how conversion works. That's how friendship works. And I think it's also how stories can work. Because stories provide a way to share an experience, right? So here's something I firmly think is true. I think stories are how our souls survive. There's an Orthodox author, I think he's Orthodox now. His name is Martin Shaw, and he's been a wilderness guide and a storyteller of the old ways of telling folk stories. You gather people together, sit down with a drum, you have maybe a little fire or something, and you tell the folk tales of that area. Um, and it takes 2 hours to get through a fairy tale or something, right? And he's a brilliant storyteller, and he has an absolutely wonderful way of delivering things. Well, he's somebody who said, I don't remember which book it was, but and I'll paraphrase something to the effect that uh, data and ideas are for your mind, right? It's kind of like maybe bits in a computer, right? Ideas are not necessarily personal. Ideas are impersonal. They're a little more abstract, right? They're very good, of course. I'm not disparaging ideas, but the thing is, the soul doesn't function at the level of ideas. The soul functions at the level of stories. So why is that? Well, it's because what is a story? A story is an experience of a person in motion towards a goal. Usually, a story, a good definition for a story is somebody who wants something bad enough to do something about it and maybe overcome any problem in the way to achieve that goal. That's a story. I think that we tell stories like here on earth in this earthly lived experience because stories are all about overcoming problems. Maybe you are the problem, maybe they are the problem, maybe everything is the problem, but you are not at the beginning of the story. You are not good enough, you are not developed enough, you are not adapted enough to reality. And at some point, reality barges in, bangs on your door, invites dwarves for tea, and you begin to realize the world I live in is not the complete world. I am not equipped to live in the full world, and I have to go on some sort of adventure to adapt to that. So the soul operates at that level, the level of persons in motion towards some kind of a goal, right? These are, and I know that I'm sharing ideas here. What is that line? I think it's from On Fairy Stories, where Tolkien talks about, you can tell a story to either escape prison or escape jail like a prisoner of war, or you can turn to stories to deny reality and run away from your responsibilities.
Right.
Multiple reasons why we turn to stories. But a lot of times, the way that we're born, the situations we're born into, the culture that we're born into, we don't agree with, we don't like, we wish was changed. And so we need patterns of activity, patterns of behavior in the world and how to act. I think if you ask someone, name your top 5 favorite movies, you'll get a better sense of who that person is rather than if you ask them, perhaps describe your politics or describe how you live your life or what your origin story is. Because yes, all of that sort of matters, but the stories that you love are your sort of mental pantheon for how you get through life and how you decide this is a good way for me to live. That's how you survive. If you don't have enough stories, you don't do anything. And I do think you run into despair. I think we are in a meaning crisis right now because our stories, a lot of them have been shot out at the knees, or they have just simply not been told. And so we have generations of young people who don't know how to engage with the world, with themselves, with each other, don't know how to build a future. All they can do is look at the meaningless moralless current situation and just panic because
Right.
there's no patterns, no stories, no legendariums for how to respond to that, how to look past the immediate problems and how to decide here's a way that I can sacrifice or here's a way that I can band together with bravery and cheerfulness with friends and find a way to do some good.
I'm thinking of two quite distinct things, but the first is the biblical imagery of eating words. It happens in the Old Testament. There's the invited to eat a scroll. One of the prophets is invited to eat a scroll. But then in the New Testament, there's this sense of like Jesus's words are like bread. Like you need them to survive. So the picture you're painting for us has a deep scriptural resonance that you can't live without language, without words, without telling the story, right? And then the second thing, just as you were finishing, I'm reminded of a teacher who was describing to me, she was doing a master's degree at night and teaching in a Catholic school by day. And she said she was just morally and spiritually exhausted by her master's degree at the secular university because everything that she thought was true about the world was now like problematic. That's the word that,
Really? Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
we hear this, everything is problematic. Now, there are things that are genuinely problematic, but I feel like this word gets thrown around a lot. And she said everything she thought she knew or believed about the world was thrown into question, but there was nothing there to replace it. There was no new
Right.
story except maybe the story that there is no story, or that
Right.
you have to like invent a story that has no relationship to reality, but is just like your sort of assertion or whatever. And it was just like, it was hopelessness that sort of, and when I tell that story in some of my talks, and young people, university students in particular, will come up to me and say, that's been my experience of my ed degree, my English degree, that an English department would be the place where we deconstruct meaning and then don't replace it with anything
Mhm.
except this sort of injunction to like make your own meaning, which is a game you can't win. Anyway, I hear that a lot from young people in our culture, right? So you're diagnosing something very prevalent, at least in my own experience of encountering young people. And part of me thinks that, one place where we get stories is political extremism. I don't care which side. And one thing it has going for it is it's going to tell you a story in which you can see yourself participating in something that matters. And that's appealing when a lot of mainstream education, whatever else, is like passing the buck on that question or actively dismantling, right?
Agreed. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What do you say to young people when they walk up to you and they connect with that and they feel just as lost and hopeless and, unmoored from anything that should bring them sanity and direction? Yeah, what are some things that you're saying to them?
Gosh, I mean, I think the big thing is that I say that I have found in Catholicism a deeply compelling and coherent worldview that helps me make sense out of these things. That like the legitimate concerns in whatever postmodern literary theory, let's say, for example, right? I mean, there's real true things that are trying to be said in that
Mhm.
context, right? And there are real problems that need addressing that these tools develop to try to say something about. Maybe they overshoot or whatever. But I've found in Catholicism a worldview that can take into account the actual legitimate criticisms without like burning down the house.
Right.
Like that gives us a foundation from which to work, from which to find meaning, from which to integrate the knowledge across a variety of disciplines. And that like I just that's the reason I'm Catholic,
Yeah.
is that it's able to put the pieces together, not uncritically, not in a fideistic kind of way, but in a really responsible and integrative way. And so yeah, that's the story that makes sense to me. And I find I would say, now this might take us too far afield, but I think even the recent conversations we're having about the uptick of converts, particularly young people,
Mhm.
I think that's a big part of what they're discovering is there's a world that has either said no stories are true, or you've got the option for like political extremism. That's one place where people are saying that their story is true, but that's not particularly satisfying.
Mm.
And in that like barren desert, Catholicism emerges as a kind of oasis where there's a story, or I mean there's the capital S story, but then there's also like stories that can make sense of science and and knowledge and literature and human relations and all the drama around sex and gender and like all the things,
Mhm.
or artificial intelligence and what does it mean to actually know anything. Do computers know? Do I know? What is knowing? How, like, does my life have any purpose if computers can do all the things? Or environmental crisis or war in Europe. I mean, like whatever the thing is,
Yeah.
there's a way of making sense of it that doesn't just lead to despair
Mhm.
or throwing up your hands or numbing yourself into, like dopamine,
Doom
whatever
scrolling. Yeah.
cycles, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Doom scrolling. So, but I think also the young people who come up to me, like I almost don't have to say all of that because they're already partway there. Like they just, what they really want is just enough support and community to get through their degree because they know they have to get this degree that is
Yeah.
going to be soul sucking. And can they get some support and community in their campus ministry or in some online communities or whatever,
Yeah.
or in a parish,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So,
remember somebody shared their story, this same sort of thing in college, and the what she said, she wanted to argue everything, or he wanted to argue everything. I don't remember what it was. And so he defaulted to the answer, and, and he would keep saying, "The answer you're looking for is this," with no statement of agreement or disagreement. And so they had to like pass him because he demonstrated mastery of what they wanted him, but there was no acknowledgement or buy-in, which I thought was awesome. Um,
oh my goodness. Oh, allow me for just so we just my son is going to go to university here in the next year, and we were talking about like what's the strategy for dealing with some of this stuff. And he thought about like having a YouTube channel where you just do essentially what you just said. I mean, this is the title for the YouTube channel. The answer you are looking for is, and you just like wend your way through your undergrad saying the answer you are looking for is, but like video logging it
mhm,
as a way of like critiquing the institution or the approach to education on offer in the institution. If it's not a holistic and integrated truth
yeah,
seeking approach, if it is really the answer you're looking for is approach, then let's say it out loud and just say like, I'm here playing the game because I have to. Uh,
mhm,
and that's what you've invited me to,
yeah,
which is the exact opposite, by the way, of what we want to do in Catholic school. Like the
right,
people who disagree with us in Catholic school, we want to invite them to disagree with integrity. We do not want to put them in a place where they feel like their job is to say the answer you are looking for is. If the atheist in the Catholic school feels like that's what they have to do, then we're failing.
yeah, I
The
agree,
atheist in the Catholic school should be invited to be a full participant to seek truth together, right?
agreed,
Yeah.
agreed. That right there, seeking truth together. I do think that's one of the essentials of you know, the gospel message, the kind of gift that Christianity brings the world. Um, and I think we sort of struggle with it. It's taken me a long time to sort of work my way around to it. But the very simple sense that when Christ says that I am the way, the truth, and the life, right, we'll just take out the truth just for a second here. When he says I am the truth, that then means any truth statement that is true, found anywhere, said by anyone, is a meeting with Christ. Doesn't matter the religion it comes from, the tradition, somebody you profoundly dislike. Now, people can say things that appear to be true, that can be misleading or can be, muddled. And so we got to do the adult work of mature discernment and all of this stuff. But there's the line from, is it St. Paul in Corinthians? And I'm wonderful with my Bible here. But where he says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is good and lovely and righteous and all of that stuff. And I would add the little sort of gloss, whatever is noble, true, good, and lovely, wherever you find it, let us celebrate those. Okay. I think that's implied in what is being said there. So I don't think that Catholics, specifically the Catholic tradition, should be afraid of or have any reservations or be afraid of anything. I grew up with an experience of Catholic Christianity that was very cult-like, and it was very constraining. It was very it was a straitjacket on creativity. And it was actually in wrestling with that that I started trying to formulate my own understanding that grew into the community I now run, and then my own faith journey. But it just became clear to me that your faith is not supposed to be, and it cannot be, a straitjacket on your creativity. It's a lifeline. It's a lifeline that lets you go anywhere without any fear of ever getting lost. No matter what subject you're researching, no matter how deep or weird or place you need to go, there's certain tenets, there's like anchors that go deeper than anything you're looking at. And as long as you hang on to those, you're able to now discern what truth there is in these things that you're exploring. Again, faith traditions or complex moral problems or existing situations, your answers are going to come from this bedrock that you're anchored to. I love the metaphor of Ariadne's thread, right? Theseus is trying to rescue Ariadne, or he's trying to get through the labyrinth, and he's trying to figure out the problem of the Minotaur. And the only way in and out is the fact that he's got this thread. Everybody else has died. So, same metaphor, when we come up against the complexity and the monstrosity of what is in the world, we can be helpless and we can run into tight corners and get into all kinds of problems, and then we just get picked off. Well, we are called, there is a point at which there is a spirit of adventure, and that does call for some resilience. It does call for tact and tactfulness. And maybe we're not all running into the middle of the maze to deal with the monsters. Maybe that's some people who are the tip of the spear warriors, and maybe the rest of us are doing all kinds of other things. But we've got that thread. Maybe it's a silver thread or a golden thread, and it can either give you a way out or it can give you a way in. And if we have that kind of confidence, we don't need to have any fear engaging with anybody. Now, in the moment, we may not have all the answers. And I think it's good to be humble to go, I don't know that answer. That's a really good one. But I'm not afraid to, especially as teachers, right? I think it's difficult to stand up in front of a class and try to have the answers for them, and then to be, sniped at or picked off from people who are repeating horsemen of the apocalypse level questions from YouTube and stuff. But to be able to recognize there's a reason why these questions matter right now, and there's an opportunity here to actually learn why people feel that these are obviously true. And sometimes it's a mismatch of the story that we're living. So we feel like we're living in a different universe. So sometimes it's just a matter of just telling a different story. And then sometimes, there's the apologetics and there's the idea level. I think it's so valuable. That line from St. Peter, I don't remember the document, but he goes, what is it? Always have an answer for, or what is it?
The
have a
hope that is
reason.
in you. Be prepared to give an answer for the hope that is
The
in you.
hope that is in you. There you go. The thing that strikes me about that is everyone goes, yes, okay, let's everybody get into apologetics. And I'm like, yes, but hold on a second. If nobody can see that there is a hope in you, the reasons aren't really going to matter too much. Like if the witness isn't there to be compelling, like that lovely line, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
Right.
If you're going to get into an argument with somebody and lose them, again, we're not talking like being online, podcasting, broadcasting, being on a pulpit. That's a different kind of communication versus you're in a classroom, you're having coffee, you're with friends, you're with family. If having a conversation is going to make you an enemy, maybe that needs to happen. But I really love the line, the advice from, I think it was C.S. Lewis, who said, after having an argument with an atheist, can we still go out for coffee or beer afterwards?
Right.
I want to be that kind of person where we can profoundly disagree on whatever, but we're still going to be good friends because I genuinely want what's best for them, and I'm not going to force anything until they ask. And that's why they say, have good reasons for the hope that is in you. That implies that it's up to them to elicit,
Right. Be
questions.
prepared to give an answer means someone's asking a question.
There you go.
And let me jump on this word fearless, because I think the person, Chesterton comes out as an example, right? The guy who could have a beer with his interlocutors, they get a vigorous disagreements and then stay great friends. The ability to do that is rooted at least in, it's partly his personality, but it's rooted at least in part in fearlessness. He is not afraid of engagement. What you described as your upbringing, I've seen more Catholics than I can count who they grow up in a context like that. And if they stay in the church, they need some kind of healing from it in their relationship with the church and with the culture.
Mm-hmm.
But plenty of them leave the church because it looked like the church was afraid of something. It was afraid of some complexity in human sexuality. It was afraid of the results of modern science. It was afraid of this book that I read that I found really compelling and interesting, but everyone told me it was the work of Satan, and it just clearly was not.
Yeah.
And so what were we afraid of? We think we're protecting our children by sometimes by putting up these barriers. I recently had a conversation, we haven't released it yet on the platform, but it was about theology teachers who kind of put up like careful walls around evolution by saying like it's only a theory. Well, of course there's a way in which it is only a theory if we understand what that means from a scientific point of view. But
Mhm.
how that is very often used is to say like we don't need to accept the best science because it looks like it might be a problem for faith, and therefore
Yeah.
you should be on your guard.
Mhm.
And whereas a Catholic school that is like, this is not a problem for faith. All
Mhm.
of the recent popes don't think it's a problem for faith. The overwhelming majority of the Guild of Theologians don't think it's a problem for faith. A huge swath of Catholic scientists who study this don't think it's a problem for faith. We can boldly approach it. Now we need to know how science works and that the best science today is not the final answer and all these things develop. That's all true.
Yeah.
But the question is the posture of fear,
Mhm.
right? And when we model a posture of fear, whether it's in our families or in our schools, we're not actually protecting our children. We're
Right.
actually setting them up for a problem that they're going to have to resolve one way or another down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And
it's so true. It also is sort of, looping this back a little bit to storytelling. Storytelling is like or consuming stories, right? It's a bit like having a varied diet, right? If you're eating, for example, an extremely restricted diet, you're not properly probably okay. Maybe there's conditions where this is not true, but in general, I think it's fair to say, and a doctor will probably back me up, you're not properly constituted to engage with the world around you. And an ideal human living condition is that you're probably eating again before the hyperfactoried present age or over industrialized food economy thing. You're probably eating everything that grows out of the ground in your area. You're nourished by all of the bacteria and the vegetables and the animals, and they're all doing a whole lot of processing, and you've developed immunity to all of the issues in your area, right? And then maybe the villages like over the hill, they're bringing you extra stuff, and so you are filled with information that maps you onto the area that you live. That creates a resilient immune system, as opposed to somebody who's eating one or two things. They will have an extremely poor and weak immune system. So, yes, fast forwarding to modern day, when you eat a variety of different foods, different colored vegetables, different kinds of meats, different kinds of grains, not just monocrop culture, you have a greater chance at robust physical health because you're literally giving your body multiple sources of information to work through and balance over. And, that switches your epigenetics on and off so that you can adapt appropriately to risks and changes in your environment and the culture and whatever. Same thing with stories. If you grow up on five stories, maybe, um, you literally don't have enough flexibility and adaptability and resilience in your soul. We humans need a million stories to be able to handle life. Everything that you want to get up to in life, whether it's getting a job or getting married or surviving the playground or learning a new skill, all of these things are nested inside stories. And invariably, whenever somebody goes up against a task, you're channeling some kind of a story to help you adapt to or respond to whatever the situation is. And then as we go through phases in our life, we need new kinds of stories, that phase that keeps orienting you to the next phase so that you're always anchored and oriented towards a way to respond to things. So we need a varied diet. And this is sort of goes back to, why myth is such a massive topic for me. Topics like the actual myths from many of the cultures around the world, topics like fairy stories, a lot of the classical fiction, and then you can sift through and find excellent present day fiction. You need a wide variety of all of it to take a huge chunk of any of that and go, well, it's not possible to determine what is in this and we should just throw it all out because somebody could have injected something bad in the cup of orange juice, right? Somebody could have added something to the cookies and that's going to be harmful. You can't survive that. And I'm like, okay, there's a massive difference between what you put in your mouth and what you put in your mind. And that becomes more complex and nuanced the older you get. You should be able as an adult to handle meat, and that comes with bone and gristle and stuff you got to chew and spit out that doesn't serve you, as opposed to a child where you can only provide them milk. And then there are some of us who, especially storytellers, I believe are called to be first responders when culture crashes. So when people can't see the future anymore because they don't have the stories to get there at all or to imagine it, the storytellers are the ones who dream that and who imagine that first. And they turn that into these captivating, sort of energy charged little experiences that go on to live in somebody else and then come to life in somebody else's imagination. And then all of a sudden, that person, if they agree that, yes, this is a good pattern for how I can live my life, they can then take that in and then act like that. That's, I think, the beauty of a story is you can intuit like all at once. This is also why stories are so hard to talk about sometimes. Unlike an idea where you can sort of start at the beginning and maybe progress all your way nicely to the end, a story is like a person in that I can't sit down, Brett, and just create a checklist of everything that makes you you. Understanding you in your totality is an intuitive experience that you just sort of get all at once. And when you go to watch a movie or read a book, yes, you progress page by page until you get to the end. And then the totality of the story is like, it's like a person. It's like a field of energy that you intuit and you understand all at once. And then you decide whether you love it or you don't, or whether it's helpful or, or not. And then it instantly can go to work on you. It starts to act on you.
Let me share an example of something you described. The metaphor you were doing with how the very diet prepares you to respond to your environment. My kids have been filled with stories, mythology from around the world, scripture. First, they read the Action Bible, and then there's a full text children's Bible from St. Mary's. So after they're done the
Mhm.
Action Bible, they have to read that. And then all the books we read to them and whatever. And what happens over and over and over again is we'll
Mhm.
watch the news
Mm.
out of something that I could never predict. The other day, it was like, oh, that's just like David and Absalom. And I was like, hold on. How is that like David and Absalom? But the stories we're living in, they just have so many
Mhm.
points of connection
Yeah.
that when they see a dynamic in international relations, interpersonal psychology, like whatever is going on in the news, or even when we watch sports, they'll find all these analogies with the stories, and it makes them incredibly flexible
Mhm.
at interpreting and making sense of their world, right? Or even if there's something going on in our community or our family where we're trying to sort through a problem, they'll very often find an analogy from a story that they know. And it's amazing to watch them do it because sometimes it's not immediately apparent to me the analogy they're making. And so you have to ask them, like, well, tell me more about that connection. And they have this incredible facility for it. And it's because they're like their little brains, they're like kids ask for stories the way they ask for food.
Yes.
To go on your analogy, right? They'll literally like tell me a story, tell me a story, tell me a story. And when they develop the capacity for it, or the capacity that the stories give them to engage with their world, it's really a remarkable thing. But it feels like a fully human thing to do. That's the way
Yeah.
humans engage with the problems in the world, right?
Agreed. Yeah, there was a book that I read years and years ago called it was called The Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim. And I don't remember everything, about his provenance and all of his work that he did and stuff, but there were a few central things that really stood out to me with his work. Basically, he was involved as a psychologist in the healing of traumatized children, trying to help them to reformulate and reconstitute themselves. I believe this was turn of the century, perhaps I don't know, before during the First War. I don't know. One of the things that he did, and so he went on to write a book about it, all big, thick thing, was how fairy tales he found were essential to his practice of helping these children. And what I've understood is he would read these stories to them and he would just go through maybe hundreds of these stories. And what he found is children would cotton on to specific stories and he would go spam that one 20 nights in a row, 100 nights in a row. What he began to realize is that little soul is working through something. It's chewing, it's processing. It's like chewing this little, little bit of meat of adult something that you've given them, and they're processing it. And one of the points that he said was, don't give the answer,
Right.
because that loses for them the opportunity to intuit and come to their own understanding. And you'll know when they finally kind of either got it, understood it, or don't have a need for it anymore when they go to ask for a different story. They've metabolized the intuited idea that's in that thing, and they've internalized it. And it's also, it can be, especially I think as parents, maybe as teachers, auditing a classroom, I've found you can get a sense of what somebody needs and where they're at by the stories that they go back to over and
Right.
over and over. It's an instant sort of metric, like, where are you at? What do you need in life? What stories are you watching? And like returning to. That's an indicator of, the state of your soul.
This leads us to something that we wanted to get to, which is the question of stories for healing, maybe in the first instance, the author, but then healing the culture. And as I set that up, I just want to share a brief example. And I don't know, I've shared this somewhere else recently, so apologies if someone's hearing this for the second time, but when my son Oscar was little, he asked for the Three Billy Goats gruff over and over and over again. And we just did a little internet research, and I don't know if Bruno Bettelheim was in the background of the advice we got or not.
Okay.
But the idea was, yeah, keep reading him the story, but then ask him which character he is in the story. And we had never even imagined this. And he said, well, Dad is the biggest Billy Goat, and Toby, his big brother, is the middle Billy Goat, and I'm the littlest one. And so the story he was telling himself is, I can go out in the world because I have a dad and a big brother.
Hmm.
And that was just how he was making sense of things, right? Now, we didn't give him the answer. We asked him, who are you? And I don't even remember if we had a conversation, what the conversation was after that. But the point is, I've seen exactly this dynamic with a kid who was doing something that as a parent, we were completely blind to what was going on with him asking for the same story over and over and over. And then when you asked him, it was clear as day. Like, he knew exactly what he was doing, but through this lens of this question that we found on the internet, which is, which character are you identifying with? Now,
Hmm.
and maybe those things shift over time, but it was very precise in this particular case. But I'll share another story now as the lead into the healing question,
Mm.
and it's one that we talked about before we pressed play. Just the other night, I'm reading The Lord of the Rings to my 5 younger children, and we just finished reading The Siege of Gondor, which is the story of Minas Tirith is under attack. The Dark Lord has loosed his forces. They've crossed the river, and it's gruesome. They're digging trenches and they're building siege engines, and they're launching heads, decapitated heads over the wall. And I mean, it's intense, right?
Mhm.
And I said to my kids, some of whom are also history buffs, so they know a little bit about World War I. I said, Tolkien was a soldier in World War I. Like, he lived in trenches, and they were just completely blown away. There was like, no way. Like, and I was like, when he's writing this is not just a literature professor sitting around with his imagination. This is a war veteran, probably working through his PTSD. Like, this is real stuff.
Wow.
And they were completely blown away that this war and this particular chapter, but the whole work, was not just someone with a great imagination, but a person with a history, and not only his own personal history, but a person in a culture that was completely traumatized by war, and that he was writing into a space of his own, writing out of his own trauma, but into the culture's trauma.
Mhm.
And it becomes, on many lists at the end of the 20th century, the greatest book of the 20th century, without very many people saying out loud
Yeah.
that this was all of us processing, like, first one world war and then another one. So you talk about when a culture is facing a crisis, it needs storytellers to process the crisis. And you've got storytellers who are healing themselves through story, but then who are also contributing to the healing of culture through story. And that's a big part of why you do what you do with your online community and that sort of thing.
Agreed. Yes. No, it's absolutely true. Um, what is it? The Oracle of Delphi once said, "Know thyself." Right? It was like carved over the lintel, and it's the hardest thing to do, to literally find out who you are. what you actually think, why you're here, why you have been gifted to humanity, why you've been gifted to yourself. What are you supposed to do with the time that is given to you? These are really hard questions to figure out. And it doesn't help when you have systems or people or upbringings that um, deny you something central, such as the dignity of you, that you are good and wanted, and that you're supposed to be here, and that you showed up at the perfect time in history to do something. And it might not be massive, it could just be one little thing that nobody will ever hear about, and you will change the course of the future. When you're denied that, when you're told that you're an embarrassing parasitical meat bag on a planet that doesn't mean anything, and we're due for some sort of meteor that's going to wipe us out. And so, yeah, please
And
pay
it'd
your
be better
taxes.
off without us.
Yeah. And you're probably better off not being here at all. That is an absolutely awful message. And here's the thing, we can't live this way. We don't live this way. At some point, you break down and then you do something awful. Some of us can't get to that point. There's maybe extra stores of resilience in us or whatever. And so, what do? We turn to maybe substances or we turn to stories. I mean, since the pandemic, Netflix has become a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut. And it's missed the opportunity to feed people. And instead, it's, a lot of stories have been co-opted by various agendas and they've watered down the point of stories so that you don't have to pay attention to them. And but they've proven something, which is, well, partly from bread and circuses. They've proven that people will sacrifice human community, if it's denied them, to get more stories, not just because they're addictive, but because if it's junk food, you're still starving and you're not properly being fed. And so you keep going for more and more and more and trying to find more good food, right? I'm saying all of this to say that we do need good stories. We need lots of good stories. And unfortunately, there is a lot of junk food. Now, at the same time, there are stories that very quickly rocket up to incredible popularity. And then some of them fall away very quickly because it's just a trend. But then some of them actually stay. They find fresh popularity later on. New audiences discover them, decide there's a deep truth in here. Sometimes, and I find it hilarious when I do think this is also true, that sometimes the film directors maybe don't even know what they're doing because you're cooking with good ingredients that have been, you know, not just sifted, but distilled over 2,000 years of Christian engagement with culture. And so you're now working with a kitchen that's just stocked with a lot of bad ingredients. And there's an incredible number of good ingredients, and you can, by accident, stick a bunch of good stuff together. And then the population goes wild, and you're like, whoa, I didn't expect that. I mean, we thought it'd be good, not that good, right? Because there's something there that speaks immediately to the human soul. There's this book by Sister Nancy Usselman, and I've interviewed her at least twice on the Legend Fiction channel. She wrote a book called Becoming Media Mystics, and I love this book.
Say the title again?
Becoming Media Mystics.
Gotcha.
Okay. So the definition of a mystic is not somebody who's in touch with reality in a very fuzzy way. No, a mystic is somebody who has direct connection to the divine. Now, it doesn't mean they understand it. It doesn't mean that it is clear and obvious what they're seeing, but it is some sort of direct connection. We need to cultivate the kind of vision that a mystic has, where what does a mystic see or do? They see God behind everything. Now, that's not a very happy or nice thing to do all the time. Sometimes that's profoundly challenging. It doesn't make life easier, but it certainly makes life worthwhile. And there's a deep joy beneath all of the suffering and the pain maybe that can come from it, a deep joy knowing I found the right thing. I found the pearl of great price, and I'm prepared to lose everything because I know that I cannot lose this insight or this truth or this is a contact point with reality itself. So that's a mystic. So what is a media mystic? It's somebody who practices that kind of a vision that can actually mean you will become more discerning and more patient, because you recognize humanity is in a process of accompaniment by God and by the angels and by everything good. We're not being forced into faith at gunpoint. Praise the Lord, that's not a thing, at least in the First World West. For a lot of us, we're incredibly fortunate that's not, how the church operates anymore. Not that she ever really wanted to. We look at stories And we're trying to find where might God be in this? Where might this be a bridge for conversation into God? Because there are, this is the thing that I love about things like fandoms, right? And stories. And yes, there's a whole conversation about how fandoms have now become co-opted in toxic spaces and lack of an ability to see the human in, the conversation. Put that aside for a second. I think that that's, first of all, it's a crying shame. Fandoms are the best way to make friends, because a fandom of anything is a group of people going, we all love this thing together. This is all a part of our identity. We share this identity, right? This is one reason why I encourage, especially storytellers, but also people, at the very least, have a working knowledge of what's out there in the culture so that you are able to connect with people. We need stories in every era because we need these timeless truths to be translated into the words and the modes and the styles and the presentation forms of that time. Especially, I do think for younger people, maybe around my age, maybe are not yet convinced that the past holds the kind of wisdom that we're told it does, because we're still trying to figure out how to navigate this arena and the games that make up this life. So we need stories of right now to start to model that to us. I think it was the Holy Father, past Father Pope Francis, who would say we're constantly in a process of translation of the gospel into the current. Now, that doesn't always mean it's going to be the current Gen Z slang or something, but it is a reinterpretation without losing the core sense of what is there, reinterpreting it into the themes and the modes and the points of contact with where the world is just a point of just dealing with reality as it is, not just as we want it. Storytellers will do that too. We're constantly in a process of translation, of reconnecting us to the ancient future and to the wisdom of the past, but then there's also the wisdom of the present. This is why healing storytellers is central. If we want to heal the culture and if we want to maybe transform things or do something good, first it has to start with coming home to yourself, knowing yourself. And that's one thing we're struggling, striving, creating programs and creating little tools to do in the community, and we can talk about that. If you have no idea who you are, why you're here, what you love, and where your conscience is. Again, I come back to this sense of we don't believe in faith at gunpoint. We don't believe in communion and community at gunpoint. That's not free. I think the Holy Father, again, Pope Francis, was adamant that there needs, when it comes to engaging with other people, even people we disagree with, there has to be no hint of coercion, right? Same thing with stories. Now, there are some stories that we do tell that are a bit like maybe parables, or they're a bit like morality plays, like from the Middle Ages, right? Or there's stories a bit like what you see on all the Christian bookshelves, and they're crafted for a Christian audience that wants Christian stories about how to be Christian, and this is how we do it and how we live, and we like stories that reaffirm this reality to us, okay? There's a place for that. And maybe they all end with altar calls, and that's a specific kind of story. That's not the kind of story that I'm looking to create, or the people in my community are also not looking for that kind of story. We're looking for the kinds of stories. We believe that we need the kinds of stories that are just as good as all the blockbusters that are out there, that are told so well that you could pass it to somebody on the subway and go, this is amazing. You'll love it. Not because, again, the beauty of like Tolkien and Lewis is that they weren't trying to instill altar calls in the general culture. They were trying to recall humanity to a shared story that we all intuit and agree with. And you don't even have to be Christian to watch Lord of the Rings and go, I don't know what this is, but this is my identity now, right? Because there's something so deeply human in
Right.
it.
And one of the things that has happened with, well, let's take one at a time here. The forced story.
Hmm.
The I want to call it almost propagandistic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's something off-putting, there's every once in a while there's like the blockbuster Christian movie that you're told that you need to go watch it to make sure that it gets the rating so that other people will go watch it to keep it in the theaters. I'm like, if it's not good enough to watch for its own sake, don't tell me to pay to watch it. So that, right?
Right.
I'm
Mercy watching.
I'm embarrassed that I feel like I need to like campaign for something not on its own merits.
Yeah.
right? And so there's something, but this goes back to what you said earlier about fear. There's something in the framing of that that is coming from a fearful kind of place, where something like Tolkien is coming from a kind of serene confidence, and that translates across to the audience that doesn't feel coerced at all, that doesn't feel like they're being beaten over the head with a message, but that it feels instead like somebody understands me,
Right.
right?
Right.
And like we've all seen a movie where someone's beating us over the head with something and it's exhausting. And then we've seen a movie where this describes something that I have encountered in my life. Someone understands me and has given me tools to better understand myself. And if
Mhm.
Christians can be the ones making the great film and the great literature that has people having that reaction,
Mhm.
that's that's the real evangelistic work, even if it doesn't look evangelistic on the surface in the way that some of this other stuff
Yeah.
might, you know.
Well, I think, and here's where we end up side questing into another conversation around what does it mean to evangelize to the wider culture when it's at a point of antagonism towards the Christian Inc. message, or the gospel labeled as a Catholic message. There a lot of people in the wider culture either don't know it, have never heard it, or have been disinformed about it or something. So they're not in a place, to hear that. So I like to go back to what kind of blew me away, actually, paying attention to how Christ handled his ministry during his 3 years after spending 30 years in silence. Like, we have no idea what he did during those years. We can assume, and I take actually a lot of heart in this, in that he spent 30 years being an incredible human being. That right there, the amount of time spent in being a good human being. Okay, so what does that even mean? Well, the fact that we have to ask that question is a little bit of a problem. We don't have enough stories to answer that question. So we need those stories. But a good human being is, how do you say, fully alive, right? There's a sense of self confidence. There's a sense of joy. There's a sense that there's a reason why I'm here. I'm here to discover and embrace that reason. I am in good relationship, healthy, resilient relationships with my family and my community. I'm able to withstand, negative things. I'm able to heal and bounce back from bad things that happen to me. I'm able to keep kind of an even keel and do good for others, protect the innocent, lift up those around me, stand up against those who are a problem, right? So be a good person. The golden rule, cardinal law that Christ answered. What is required that I be saved? It's, what is it? Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And you can swap out the word God with total reality, ultimate truth, point of your life. They're all the same thing, which means that's a level of conversation we can have with every human being. So Christ spent 30 years preaching that gospel before he then took it to the streets. And then what did he do? What's the percentage of his time that he did spend in the streets? Feeding, healing, exorcising demons out of things, telling stories, all the kinds of things that the poor, desperate people who just wanted to live good lives and be able to kind of catch their breaths for a moment from the decades of oppression, abuse, denial, human, atrocities, and so on. He's going around doing an incredible amount of healing. These are corporal works of mercy and a ton of stories. He's not asking them to come and get graduate degrees in divinity. He's giving them parables so that little, bits of adult food to start thinking and chewing. And then he goes in sidebars with the disciples and he goes, okay, pull out your notebooks, write this down. You're supposed to have the ears to hear. And half of them didn't, until it took the Holy Spirit coming much later on. And then they were day drunk with like, oh my gosh, I finally got, and able to then speak in multiple languages, but able to take the depth of what they knew and translate it into what people needed to hear when they needed to hear it at the point of where their consciences were. Why I say all of this is because we need stories for every stage of the human journey. We need stories for every stage of the faith journey of how and when you are alive. And there are some stories that we tell for our group, for the choir. Choir needs a heck of a lot of storytelling, more than we like to admit. Good stories like Tolkien, and a lot of Marvel stories. They're not even trying to be Christian. Honestly, you scratch the surface a half inch and the Christianity, the Christicity in it just explodes out because it's all there. We're at a point where Christ entered the human thing, the human family, and changed something, profoundly changed something. And now we're not satisfied, and we can't build lives that thrive and contribute towards a future that build each other up unless we're doing something related to being a good human who is anchored in a healthy, thriving sense of being human. This is one reason why I love a lot of Jordan Peterson's early work, because he's recapturing all of this from a very psychological point of view. But these are timeless spiritual truths. And even if you don't have a faith relationship, an orientation towards the truth that is constantly self-correcting and orienting you beyond your ego, beyond your pride, so that you're constantly making sacrifices and changing yourself to achieve a good or a truth that you recognize deserves your effort and your life and your focus. Well, frankly, my friends, that is a faith relationship with ultimate truth. That's a faith relationship with God. And nobody's got a pretty journey. And a lot of us are still trying to clarify our stories. Culture is in a state of evolution. Our sciences are in a state of evolution. Our Catholic tradition is in a state of development and renewal and clarity. Everything is being translated into greater clarity, because the older you get, you don't lose all the progress you made as a child. You integrate it all. You bring it along with you, but then you also recognize, well, that was the child's way of understanding it. It was still true, but now we need new stories, new articulations that capture more of the nuance, because life is complex. And so you need a nuanced key to unlock, these doors.
I'm going to amend reading or writing as finding out what you love and why. And I'm going to add to that and practicing loving the good, right? That's part of what you're doing. And I mean, you've said more than once that this could be done poorly. This could be done in a pathological way. You could do things, and you got to do the sifting. And maybe there's been some literature that's been right. And even good things can become idols done the wrong way. Writing done well is practice knowing what we love and why, and practice loving the good. I was reminded the contemporary Catholic writer Donna Tartt. I don't know if you're familiar with some of her
No,
works.
not
She
yet.
writes great long novels. She figures she writes about a novel a decade. She hopes she has 6 in her
Wow.
before her time is up and she goes the way of all flesh. And I was watching an interview where she was talking about her writing process, and one of her great characters, she said it took her a year and 200 pages to get to know them. And then those pages didn't end up in the book. They weren't necessary for the story. They were necessary for her and her process, because she was getting to know someone. And I don't think she said this, but I don't think it would be too much of a stretch. Someone that she loved, right?
Yeah.
That she understood, as you're describing, from the inside out. And so there was something in that process that was necessary for her, even though from the final product point of view, it wasn't. It was necessary because it helped her to see where the character was going, but those particular passages weren't necessary. But there was something about the process and about her, let's say, relationship with the character that was necessary from that. And so that was her description of that process was ringing in my head as you were describing this. And so those 200 pages from Donna Tartt, the world is never going to see, which is true of the vast majority of writing that's going to happen in your high school creative writing class. The vast majority of it, the world is never going to see, but there's some value in what you are becoming as you go through that process. Dominic, we've set the record for the longest episode so far of Making Every
Woohoo.
Class Catholic podcast.
Great.
Before we wrap, tell us if there are English teachers who are themselves writers, or who have in their classes aspiring writers who would like to be involved in a community of writers who are doing the kinds of things you're talking about. Where should they go to find you in your community?
Absolutely. So the website is legendfiction.com, and we're calling it the coolest community of storytellers in the world. We have about 300 right now. We've been around since the pandemic. We've been growing very slowly. And gosh, we get up to all kinds of things. We're trying to create everything. Okay, so we believe in creating an environment of ludicrous epicness. So there are writing communities that are more academical. There are some that are trying to be more highbrow. Some are more overtly religious with what they're trying to accomplish. And we're like, no, no, no. We're about dragons and Jedi and hobbits and starships and the kind of fun, epic, blockbuster stuff that especially everybody in their teenage years falls in love with because they reveal something about the world that, let's say, nonfiction or your daily life doesn't reveal. These are tropes and themes of your spiritual life. So it's important to play and mess with these symbols, of reality. Gosh, what do we have? We have a ton of different niches and spaces inside there, depending on the kind of things that you're interested in. You can add those to your membership. We have daily writing sessions, morning and evening and weekend get-togethers. We have a class of mentors who offer guidance and weekly meetings that people can join, or one of them offers a story read aloud group that you can apply to get on a wait list for. My goodness, we have writing competitions. We have anthologies that we publish pretty regularly. We now have about how many, 8 to 10 open calls for short story anthologies, meaning as soon as somebody joins, they can look at one of the anthology of stories and they can start writing for it and submit it for publication. We host an annual convention for fiction lovers every year. This year, we're now hosting 2, and we're hosting 30-day writing challenges right after these conventions. What we're trying to do is make writing so encouraging and communal and fun that you'll keep doing it. Because every time where I've had the hardest time in my life writing, it's because I didn't have anybody to share it with who understood what I was trying to do. So creating this community, people can go to legendfiction.com. You can scroll down and have a look at the wall of testimonials of people who are absolutely loving their time. Some of them have gone on to finish books, publish books, discover new opportunities through meeting agents at our online cons. And then as of this year, we have finally launched our creative writing school, and it's a 12-month program with 3 lessons a month and a dedicated mentor who will help you finish a novel in 1 year or create an anthology of 12 stories. So you will write 1 story every month, and we'll walk you through everything you need to know about the mechanics of storytelling, and then also provide you with the meetups and the mentoring to help you make that progress. So we're very excited about that creative writing school. We hope that teachers out there who are offering maybe writing classes or creative writing, or who don't have anything like that going on but are seeing that their students are showing talent, send them over to have a look. They can start a 30-day completely free trial. After that, it's $10 a month, and they can cancel at any time. And then there are add-ons that they can get access to add more to their membership so that they can learn more. But everything that I love and think and believe that we covered in this conversation is what undergirds this community, and we try to make it as fun as humanly possible.
Awesome. Well, it sounds, if I may use the term, epic. Dominic de Souza, it was great to have you on the show. A reminder that Dominic made the Making Every Class Catholic.com website. So if you ever need web work, you can check that out and see if his style might suit your needs. And a reminder, if you'd like to support the podcast, the best way to do that is by signing up for the newsletter over on Substack. And thank you again, Dominic, for being with us. And thank you all for watching or listening today. God bless.